Good afternoon. It's 5:12, so that counts as being the afternoon. And I am here on Monday, the 18th, a few minutes after noon. And what I wanted to do was atone for not having something up during the weekend. All the discussion questions have been answered. And now what I want to do is just sort of fill in some gaps between, insofar as in anticipation of the strategic plan completion. And I've already done the video about some specific futures forecasting techniques, which I don't think I'm seeing in the drafts of the plans that folks have sent me to date. So I will have to tell you again that I'm expecting that you're going to I want to see evidence of that in one way or another, especially in that what if column, that last column on the right. So see to it that you use those. I promise you, they're going to find things begin to emerge that you haven't particularly seen or thought about prior to. That's one piece. And what I'm doing today should be relatively brief. Uh, we'll add to that by sort of combining the idea of futures forecast, change leadership thinking with creative thinking. Futures thinking actually goes beyond creative thinking, but clearly these two premises complement each other very nicely. And so I'm going to walk you through that. And this video will pertain to today, the 18th, all the way through Thanksgiving, up until the 2nd of December, thinking that after all, it is the Thanksgiving weekend and the holiday the days are approaching you. But at the same time, I wanted to be sure that you had a chance to see some of this CPS, it's creative problem solving premises in action, so that you could perhaps use those too. In that last column, or even beyond, believe it or not, beyond that in the strategy column, because they kind of go hand in hand there, because you might get an idea there that might belong in the strategy row or in both places for that matter. So in any event, those things are all things you should take under consideration as you strive to become creative, futures-based change agents. Enough said. I know make it sound like a commercial sometimes. And before I forget, I may forget, and I get to the end of the video, wishing everyone a blessed Thanksgiving and enjoy. I'm going to die, so I don't know much I can do with my Thanksgiving feasting. You can see the look on my face. I do like my Thanksgiving feasts, but I do need to die more than I need the Thanksgiving feast. So we'll take it from there. Enough said. Here we go. Sharing. You'll have this agenda in this video. I'll say that again. And this video, no, I can take, no, I'm sorry. You'll have this agenda in a separate module so that you can take a look at the what you're about to see, and that you can hit the link to come back to this video as such. So we'll have two modules up. One will be this agenda you were just about to see, and then the link from that agenda back up to this video. So they go hand in hand. And here we go. Okay, and I'm not going to belabor too many things. I think you're getting tired of me yapping at you. Uh, and actually, some of this is a continuation of the previous video. I realized I hadn't covered everything I wanted to do. And I took a few things off the kidney machine and left some things on. And I did leave this piece on. In a real change process, what are the criteria to use to decide to go forward one way or the other? And this is straight out of some research I did. I forgot where I saw it. Might have been out of Fulham itself or somewhere else in my travels, but it all makes sense. And I think I did talk about this last time, but it's worth repeating. And that is, are you truly trying to meet an unmet need? Now think about what you're working on in terms of your goal. Your goal sometimes could be a little deeper in terms of the esoteric philosophical ways of looking at life, but they all seem to be zeroed in to some sort of unmet need or something that you're worried about, and that's fine. Is it a priority? And my money is that yes, certainly it's a priority to you. And I imagine if it's a priority to you, then it would be to your colleagues and to this district. And oh, by the way, the children who are involved with this in one form or another. This point about having adequate resources is a given. And I hesitate to talk about it too much, but I just mention it. If you don't have the resources, then it's kind of hard to be creative. Then again, you can be creative in finding your resources. I'll give you a quick example. Not a great one, but it's something that may give you another way to look at life. And that would be, for example, when you look for expertise, believe it or not, professors have a certain amount of expertise. I'm doing a little workshop thing about my book with a high school in Nassau County and one department in the high school, and working them through a little futures-based course they want to embed into a project I have in place. It's going to be a great project when it's completed, and my support and expertise to them will go a long way towards making it as good as it can be, in truth. And I'm not doing it I'm not getting paid for it. I'm doing it because A, I like the person who asked me to do it a lot. It's one of my doctoral mentees. And also because I see a real need to do this. So I have no problem doing it. And then if I were a full-time professor, which I'm not anymore, what, as you can guess, full-time professors have to answer to some of the same questions that teachers and have to answer to as well. Basically, what are you doing for the rest of the world? What beyond teaching? And if I were asked to answer that question, which I'm not anymore being asked, would be to say, well, I did a professional courtesy to this particular school in order to help them do what they're doing. And I'm not looking to be, I'm not looking for pay or slices of pizza or anything like that at all. I'm happy to do it, actually. And in one sense, I'm also the technical assistant, I suppose, but certainly in terms of technical assistant, that means lots of things. So you got to take the pulse of an idea of the initiative to begin with before you move forward on that. This is the hard one, though. This fifth one down, I think, is the hard one. And that would be, do they know what change means? Do they know how to make change happen? I'm going to be arrogant a little bit and say most of the time they don't. And that goes for administrators more than you may realize. Many times they don't. Haven't got the experiences, uh, think there's only their way or the highway, don't think they have the time to do it, in which case they shouldn't go ahead with the change anyway, to think it through properly. Because, as I said more than once, uh, I didn't say it to this group, but I'll say it to you now. When the spring comes, Mother's Day comes up pretty early in the spring. Many people will go to the nearest nursery and buy a flower pot, a tulip bulb pot, bloomed out. And it's all well and good, and it's nice and appreciated, I'm sure. But however, most of you may not realize the tulips aren't ready to open up in May. And so what growers do, in order for you to buy the plant in the first place, is they do what they call force the bulb, which essentially means they're going to trick the bulb into thinking it's earlier than it's supposed to be. When they bloom, tulips are meant to bloom in June, and we want them to bloom in late April and early May. We do some things to trick them to think that the spring has already arrived, and it's fine. People will be happy to buy uh, the flower pot, be very pleased with it. Now, if you're like me, every time my wife gets Mother's Day gifts from me or from her children and now our grandchildren, actually, what I'll do is I'll grab it and I'll stick it in the ground or try to keep it going. Because that's just the way I am. And I like to have them, and I'll plant them. And what always happens invariably is that the tulip will come back. It'll grow back, but it won't grow back nearly as uh, strenuously. No, that's the wrong word. It'll grow back more weakly than it would have grown had it been given its chance to go through its normal cycle. And so That's what you need to keep in mind. You can't force the flower to bloom before it's ready to bloom any more than you can force a change to move forward unless all the conditions are there. And you need to pay attention to that. If you think and it may be worth fighting the fight to make something happen before people are willing to engage it. But however, you need to be really careful about how you then mean to implement it down the line. And that brings us down from the deep understanding of what the change process itself involves, which would require an initial meeting with the group of people whom you're going to work with, by the way, is what is the dominant mindset? What do people really think about future? And I asked that question in the last discussion question, and I think the answers I got were what I was asking for, which tells me that I probably asked the question in the wrong way. So I'll ask it again, and that would be, how do you how do you read your group or people with whom you're working, your faculty, colleagues, the community, the leadership? What do they think about whether the future can be changed in the first place? And if they don't think it can be, or they're willing, or if they're not willing to exert themselves to work to make the new change occur, then you've got to factor that into your planning. Has to be put into that. Otherwise, it flops, and then everybody says, "See, I told you it wouldn't work," and that just continues the negative dominant mindset. So those are good things to consider. Hopefully, you're considering them in terms of your strategic plan that you're going to submit. But I don't, it's not really necessary for you to belabor it here, but I do want you to put it under your hat. And the goals for today are in yellow, and they are one, two, three, four, and they probably could be broken down to others, is recognize a rationale for creative problem solving, otherwise known as CPS. Practice and master some of those skills. I'm just going to model it for you for a minute. Apply CPS to your strategic planning matrix. Again, in at least two places, maybe all over the matrix, but certainly in two. That what if column, the probable future column, the yes but column. Some of the things I've seen so far have been kind of vanilla. You need to get underneath that to think it through some more. And in the strategies themselves. If you're going to take out the same strategies that people have used for a million years, you're going to get the same results. Einstein's definition of insanity was doing the same thing over and over again, even though it doesn't work. Yeah, and that has a lot of merit, that particular saying. Sort of like when I play video games, which I don't do very often. But one thing, it makes me dizzy. And the other thing is that I can't think like that very well. So I want to enter the cave to kill the dragon, and the dragon kills me. I say, okay, I died, and I stop playing the game. Other people would say, well, let me try again. If I go this way, I can kill the dragon that way, and I can get around that dragon and get to the next dragon, however the video game may be set up. And so I'm not good at thinking creatively in a video game. I'll tell you a secret. I'm just not. So in any event, you need to be able to, the goal for this particular video is to practice and master some creative problem-solving skills in order to apply CPS to your matrix, and then to connect CPS to your actual practices. Now, make no mistake about this, and I should have said this more often and sooner, is that a lot of the things I'm teaching you, you can use in your classroom tomorrow or with your colleagues. If you're running a committee of any kind, or if you're an actual administrator at this point, but just use them and pay attention to what happens. One thing that will happen if they're not used to it, which is why I keep asking those kinds of questions, they'll do this to you. They'll back off and sit back, because most people are not expected to do this. I may have told you this story already. I have a habit of repeating myself. Story I use in one of my books, I think, is the story of the Cuban Missile Crisis, which happened in 1962, well before any of you were born. But I remember, I was just a kid, but I do remember it very clearly. And I wrote a couple of articles about it since then. When John Kennedy discovered that the Russians had put missiles in Cuba, 90 miles away from Miami, with nuclear weapons on board, he wasn't about to let that continue. And the goal was to get those missiles out of Cuba without starting World War III, which almost happened if you read the history. So one of the things he did was he had his brother, who was the Attorney General, Bobby Kennedy, whose son had just been appointed to, I think, the health Secretary of Health in the Trump administration. Bobby Kennedy convened a group called XCOM, COMM. And he had all the big shot generals and admirals in the group, and he had the Department of Defense cabinet leaders and a brain trust, a think tank, if you want to call it that. And John Kennedy said to Bobby Kennedy, he says, let's let them loose. And as with any group, it went back and forth and up and down and inside and out before they came up with a pretty brilliant strategy, which I won't bore you about now. Thank the Lord that had they now thought of actually, Bobby Kennedy and John Kennedy thought of it in the end. Had they not conceived of this, of the strategy they would use to ease the tensions and get the missiles out, we wouldn't be here to discuss this. Prior to all this, during the meetings that they had, were very tense and frightening meetings for everybody. One of the members was a man named Adlai Stevenson, who was the ambassador to the United Nations and had been a presidential candidate back in the 50s. Remember, Kennedy was elected in 60. And was kind of known as an intellectual. They used to call him an egghead, which maybe he kind of was. So as he's sitting in this meeting, he kept saying, well, Russians have missiles in Cuba, 90 miles away. We have missiles in Turkey, right on the border between Soviet Union and Turkey. It wouldn't even take 15 minutes for those missiles to hit Moscow. We should say, hey, we'll take them out if you take these out. Well, they practically picked Stevenson up by the seat of his pants and threw him out of the room because he was offering a conciliatory, creative thought that they were not prepared to accept. And the ones with the cigars in their mouths were insisting that we go in and knock out Cuba, knock out Castro, pave the place, make it into a parking lot, and we'll see what happens after that. In my view, most people's view, the creative thought that by the way, that's what they did. I should have said that. In the end, when all was said and done, it was a secret deal between Kennedy and Khrushchev, the Soviet Union's premier at the time, and said, this is what we'll do. We'll take out the missiles in Turkey. They were obsolete anyway, from what I've read. And you take out the missiles in Cuba. Oh, we're going to go in and get them. And Khrushchev backed down. I said, okay. And that was the end of that. So there was an example of an idea that was stifled by a group because of their dispositions and mindsets about how to approach things in this particular case. It's a great example, though, of creative problem solving, even though they didn't use the process I'm about to show you. So what's the rationale for this? The rationale is, well, before I go any further, there's the rest of the goals. Recognize a rationale for CPS, practice and master. I already said this. You have this video, you have two links, they're right below this, here they are right here. And you'll have some graphics in one of these two links. And so before I go any further, let me just show you the next discussion question. The next discussion question is the following. After watching today's video, which you're doing right now, and reviewing the materials, which I've listed up for you in this agenda document, how do you know? This is an important question. How do you estimate the existence and or the strength of creative problem-solving skills when districts tackle change issues? You've all been in committees of one sort or another. You may not be solving the missile crisis, but you are all have been part of these things. And you've seen how so many of these meetings are chaotic wastes of time. For many reasons, which goes back to Lencioni, as I offered to you in the previous video, and the dysfunctions of teams, whether they're in the federal government at the very highest level or whether they're in your K2 building. In either case, it's the same thing. And that's what I want you to do is to somehow try to estimate how well creativity is rewarded, not as a teaching instructional tool, although that could be another conversation, so much as um, in terms of actual trying to solve the kinds of needs that you're trying to solve in your strategic plans. Requires a different set of muscles to do that. And if they even are trying to be creative, um, how welcome are those kinds of ideas as we go along? So I'll read it back to you, and that's my question. So think a little more deeply than the last answers I've gotten. After watching today's video and reviewing materials, how do you estimate the existence and or the strength of creative problem-solving skills when districts tackle change issues? And give me some examples if you can. If you can't, then that tells me something too, doesn't it? And then we're going to ask you to apply CPS to those plans. And that's how I'm going to know whether you were able to do this. Now, there's a little brief section here, but here's where I'll fill in some of the blanks. And I'm simplifying this. It's much more complicated now. One premise is, and you can answer this question for yourself, is there such a thing as a creativity IQ? And the answer seems to be maybe, what I've read. Interestingly enough, though, they have found that super really genius Mensa type people with very high IQs are not terribly creative. They can't even allow themselves to think what we call laterally, uh, and much more what we would call convergently. So the people who are slightly less intelligent seem to be better at it. And the example I always give is that creativity is not, well, I'm going ahead of myself. The idea of teaching people to think creatively, well, the other point is that no, a lot of people would say, well, you can't teach me how to be creative. I personally myself do not think I'm terribly creative. I want to be. I don't think I'm as good as I like to think that I am actually. I will confess, maybe because I'm in the Mensa group, which I'm not, or I just too scattered to think creatively as such. But I often use as an anecdote. It's not true, but it is true. And some of you are parents, uh, probably have seen something like this as well. You know, when a child's in first grade and the child draws a purple tree, shows it to the teacher, and the teacher says, "Oh, that's really great, Mary." And the teacher gives Mary a sticker to bring home. Child goes home to the mom and dad and says, "Look, I got a sticker because I drew a purple tree." And the parents, in one form or another, will praise the child, rightfully so, and put the sticker up on the refrigerator or something like that. Fast forward 12 years, 13 years, now the child is a junior in high school, and the student now goes up to the English teacher and says, "Look, I drew a purple," even the art teacher, "Look, I drew a purple tree." He ain't gonna get a purple sticker. And they persist to continue to show purple trees and things that aren't what people expect in the school systems that we have, mostly divergent thinking. Teacher may walk down to the psychologist and say, "Yeah, Johnny he's out in left field. I don't know. I think there's maybe something going on with that kid." Because the reward for creativity in schools diminishes over time. I don't like that when I say that, but it seems very true to me. You don't make room for that. We don't even use instructional methodologies to promote that. Billy Joel, I'm dating myself a little bit because I'm a big fan of his, and maybe people are not big fans or don't know who I'm talking about. But Billy Joel, I'm just using him as an example, didn't graduate from high school. Some other very famous rich people nowadays, if you equate rich with success, didn't finish high school or finish college. I don't think Steve Jobs did, if I'm not mistaken. And the reason for that is that they were thinking from left field, right field, center field, infield and they weren't getting satisfied with their responses to that in the boxed-in system that we have. That's why the phrase where the phrase "thinking out of the box" comes from. And so we're not good at rewarding creativity in the K-12 system and most likely in higher ed as well. And we're not good at it in school systems, I would wager too. I'd love to do a dissertation on this or a research study. I just thought of that. Now, when this became more of a conversation, I'm dating myself, and I was born after World War II, so don't think I witnessed this specifically. Um, People like Osborne, his first name I can't remember. It's not Kelly Osborne, and Sidney Parnes, whose name I always remember, began to create creativity systems. And they, as other organizational theorists did, not just those two folks, they took them to General Motors, they took them to industry, said they took them to advertising agencies, they said, we can create, uh, we can help you get better at what you do. And they got right out of town and were not welcome. I have a quick anecdote I'm going to tell in a second. And so they took their ideas to Japan. Japan took those same ideas along with Demings, a name you have to hear. Demings probably is a better example of this. Uh, those ideas that Parnes and Osborne were trying to have come into place in the United States were eaten up and drank the Kool-Aid totally, whether the Japanese industry and other industries in the Asian area, in the Asian world. And who's got the economies that are competing with us nowadays? Yeah, you know the answer to that. Guy I grew up with is my anecdote. Guy I grew up with, um, at one time was a very famous Madison Avenue uh, advertising executive, very, very well known. He did all the advertising for Major League Baseball. He did all kinds of corporations. He was up there, a bright guy, but also creative, obviously. So we decided we were going to write a book together. So I get in my little car and I drive into Manhattan. I go to this unbelievable skyscraper right in the middle of in Midtown. They had to do a retina scan to let me in. I go up to the highest corner executive office, and there is my friend Brett. And I'm waiting for him to see him. And I'm looking around. And I'm looking at all these projects that were going on. The only one I remember was M&Ms. There was big vats of M&Ms in the office. It was a big, huge office, and none of them had the colored shells on. They were M&Ms that were clear. All you could see was the logo M&M on the outside shell, but they had no color to them. So obviously, it was an idea that someone had come up with to peddle more M&Ms. So I finally got in to see my friend. I said, uh, "Where'd that come from?" He says, "Yeah, it was a project we worked on, and we suggested it, but they don't want to do it because it's not as distinctive as they want the M&Ms to look like." So the idea died. Many ideas will die when you're being creative. That's the idea. You create a wheelbarrow filled with ideas, and some of those ideas will stay in the wheelbarrow. Others more will not. But until you allow room for your soul and I hate to use this word, and your right brain to kick in, those ideas are lost to you. They may emerge later under some sort of stress or circumstances, but they're not going to come as readily as not. P.S. We never wrote the book, and I didn't talk to him for 4 or 5 years after that, but that's another conversation. Anyway, enough said. So you have this video as materials, and Oh, here's Sidney Pines, and what they did was they took these premises out, and then but along the way, um, none of you would remember this, but there was a movement in the public education. I want to say maybe late 70s, more like into the 80s and into the 90s for a while, but no longer. I don't think that was called gifted education. And when people said we should be taking kids who are really smart and giving them a chance to be, to meet their needs and fulfill themselves. It made sense on paper. I have a whole I have a whole course on this, so I'm making this into a 5 sentence description. Then people started to complain. Wait a minute, you're teaching gifted kids better things than you're teaching regular kids, which was sort of true, I thought. That's one of the reasons why I pulled out of it later on. But people began to politically complain about it too. And so everyone said, well, I'm talking very fast. Everyone said, well, what's the definition of a gifted child? And they came up with a very political definition. And one part of the political definition was gifted creative strengths. Again, not necessarily true. Certainly not in my experiences in working with very sharp kids. Um, Bottom line is, you can teach creativity to everyone. You may say, "Hey, I can't create anything," but you can. I haven't got a hand. I haven't got a spoon here, but if I pretend this is a spoon, and if I said to you, "I'm going to give you 5 minutes to come up with as many uses for a spoon, or even this pen, make it easier for ourselves." If I gave you 5 minutes, you would come up with some pretty good ideas. Most of the initial ideas will be kind of vanilla, obvious, left brain thinking. I think I said this to you already. Who discovered America was that question, the answer to that question has changed over time. The answer used to be Columbus. The answer no longer is that, and people begin to give you lots of ideas. I just saw an article yesterday that said that the ancient Greeks had discovered the continent, North and South America, way back before the birth of Christ, in BCE. Um, Way back before that, they just didn't call it America because they called it something else. So we kind of missed it. I'm not sure if that's a true historical fact, but they're working on that one now. We know the Vikings probably go the most credit. I always say, what about the Native Americans? I mean, they didn't pop up out of the ground. They came from Asia, and then they found North and South America. But I don't understand why we don't give them more credit for that. Because the word discover is really the issue here. In the end, as we move through this, is again a matter of recognizing the right to think laterally. The other word we use is divergently. Watch my hands. Hold them this way. Where the idea is spread out and take places. So if I said to you how many things you can say about a pen, that would be one thing. If I said to you, uh, what's the first thing you think of when I say the word ship? I used to use that one all the time. Try it tomorrow and at your dinner table. Unless maybe your wife or your husband will throw in meatloaf at you, or try it in your faculty room or your own class. And the answer will well, not almost always, but often be, oh, the Nina the Pinta and the Santa Maria, going back to Columbus, or the Titanic. You're going to hear different names of ships. And sometimes if you do, what you do is you wait. You don't uh, jump up and down with every answer you hear because that actually stifles the creativity. You got to give room for people to marinate in the idea and marinate in the idea that it's okay to say most anything, which is what a true brainstorm is supposed to be, but more often than not is not. Uh, so you wait and things begin to come out. I mean, after a while, I'll usually get the Starship Enterprise. And I like that one. Most of you don't remember what the Starship Enterprise is, but nowadays you might get the Millennium Falcon. Even that is getting old, right? And so people begin to give new ideas. And then I might say, or I might wait, and someone will say, wait, 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 I got it. Citizenship. And someone will say, well, wait a minute, that's not a ship. Yes, it is. Citizenship, gamesmanship, fellowship. And someone will say, oh, we didn't know we could say that. And then my answer to that is, I didn't say you couldn't say that. I said, what do you think of when you say ship? Now you begin to see a flurry of ideas coming through that funnel down from convergent down to, I'm sorry, from divergent down to convergent. We'll come to that in a moment. And so it began to, again, it took got some kind of love and merit and attention when the gifted education curriculum began to spread out and apply to a regular curriculum for gen ed kids, and by the way, special ed kids can be wonderful at this. I promise you, because they're not as inhibited sometimes as some of those so-called brainiacs that might have. And so the system began to take root. I wouldn't say it's still practiced routinely as a routine across industry and education, but it certainly has its place. Now, my discussion question to you is, when have you seen creativity? You might see someone say, come on, let's brainstorm. And you might get a little bit of that. And depending how people handle the brainstorm, someone might say, let's trade the missiles in Turkey for the missiles in Russia, in Cuba. Some kind of way out there, outlandish idea that no one has thought of before they begin to see potentially the merits of it, assuming that you've worked that through. And now what I'm going to do is just show you, and I would say the same thing. I'm not going to spend the time pulling these up and showing these to you. Read my lips. I expect you to watch them. You don't have to watch every single moment of it, but these are two great premises. One is a description of the master's degree that Pons and Osborne started in the University of Buffalo. It still exists today, and what they do is they work on teaching people how to be creative, and then they send them out into industry and business and to the government and to a lesser extent out into education. So there's some good descriptions there and some good diagrams. Look at the diagrams because I don't have the ability right now to put the graphics up for that. And I may put it up later, but right now I can't. And the second bullet is sort of a portal to creative ideas, creativity techniques, I should say. I'm going to model 4 or 5 for you. I'm going to bring it up right now so we can do it together. Which means I got to stop the first share. Then I have to share again. All right, I'm not going to read all of this to you, but this is 16 techniques for creativity. And here are some of them. Brainstorming is the one everybody knows. You have to remember there's 4 parts to creativity. It's on the agenda page. Fluency, flexibility, elaboration, and originality. In that order. Fluency is a lot of ideas. Flexibility is taking the same idea and twisting it around a little bit, taking away, adding to, embellishing it, which is what the next piece is, which would be the ability to elaborate on those ideas. So you flesh them out. And originality is what originality is. So those are the 4 components of creativity. The more familiar you can become in terms of using these in your leadership practices, the more you're going to create a dispositional attitude among your stakeholders to co-create with you. All right. And that's the name of my book, actually. So there's brainstorming, there's negative brainstorming, not necessarily a good idea. Brainwriting, I have to say, I've never used that one. The 5 W's and the 1 H would be like why questions and what questions. Just using words to bounce off like association. The gallery method I like. Storyboarding is something you may have heard of. Write a story about what your ideas are, what they look like. With that, we'll go role playing. Role playing is a fantastic. Everybody's up to it. Everybody, child wants to do this, and not every stakeholder wants to play the Wicked Witch of the West. But if you give them something sometimes to role play and just give them some flexibility, they'll move with you on that. And ideas will emerge from the debriefing of that. The yes and is yeah, yeah, and what would you add to that? Mind mapping, you probably are more familiar with than others. It's drawing lines, graphic organizer, add the idea, add the idea. One that's not here, I'm going to skip over some of these. It's mood boards, I like that one. Metaphorical thinking. A fancy name for that is synectics. I said to you, how would you close uh, achievement gap between special education children and general education children? Oh, your idea is to put them all in the same class. Okay. Um, what color does that look like? Red. Why red? Oh, I don't know. Red makes me angry. Interesting. How about you make the problem bigger? Oh, now it's a big red balloon. How about you make the problem smaller? Oh, now it's a my fingernail. How would you reverse it? How would you put it back together again? Those kinds of techniques I sometimes call mental gymnastics have been proven to be very effective. So you look up synectics. I'll put it in the agenda before I forget. One that I don't see here, I just wanted to mention it, is something called force fitting. And it's so obvious, except it doesn't happen so quickly. Force fitting is what it sounds like. You take two or more ideas and you squeeze them together to create something new. Yeah, the easy example is I take a watch and a radio and I put them together. I have a clock radio, which people don't even own anymore. I take a watch and a computer and I have an Apple Watch. I take having all kids of any ability in one class and I squeeze it together with multiple teachers. What do I have? I can think of several things. So I can tell you that when you do this, things happen. Any of those things. And the force fitting idea is one of my favorite as such. So you have that to look at more carefully. And I'm going to come back to the original agenda items and talk a little bit more to those things. Again, it can be taught. You need to know the difference between divergent thinking and convergent thinking. And start with that. You can do right brain, left brain too with the same premise. Fluency, flexibility, elaboration, and originality are um, components of creativity. I can't say it. Marrying them together, that is to say, divergent thinking and um, convergent thinking. Why did I say V? Create something altogether new. We're going to talk about that more in a second. And you need to prepare for those what ifs. And the what ifs as I talked to this, and as I said several minutes before this, is that what if column. Squeeze some of those strategies together. See what you see emerging that you think will happen. Or use the course impact matrix. And well, first use the futures wheel, then move to the course impact matrix. Telling a story has a lot of power too, and I just haven't got the time today show it to you. Maybe I'll squeeze it in someplace else. There's the DQ again rewritten. I just want to give you the pieces of Barnes and Osborne's CPS. Again, I can't show it to you graphically, but it begins with convergent thinking. What's all the information I need? It goes back to your strategic plan. The first thing I said to you is you got to get all the facts. That's convergent thinking. Then you begin to play with it, and now we're talking about divergent thinking. So you go from convergent thinking with fact finding, and then you go over to uh, divergent thinking using those strategies I talked about, using fluency, flexibility, elaboration, and originality to come up with some more new ideas. And then the new ideas have to be sold. Now we're going back to convergent thinking. All right, so we have this idea, and the idea is, we said, in terms of uh, heterogeneous grouping of all students with differing abilities, with multiple teachers in the same classroom. Not such, I don't know how creative the idea is. It just kind of fell out of my bald head at that moment. Now you got to sell that because the first yes but to that is, what do you think it is? Yep. How much does it cost? And will it be like one teacher teaching all day long and three teachers standing on the side watching the teacher teach? And I've seen that happen in multiple teacher classrooms. Will it require whole new PD approaches? Will it require new technology? All those things have to be, so we have to figure out what are the what ifs and what are the answers. Because now you're selling the creative idea through this process that I'm demonstrating. You're selling this creative idea that would never have emerged had you not gone through the system I just shared with you in your committees and your stakeholder think tanks and so on. But they never would have emerged had you not given them the chance to breathe air, naturally speaking, organically speaking. But now you got to sell. You got to come back to the point. You got to come back to how do I get Board of Education to embrace this, the community to embrace it. A lot of you are talking about DEI. I asked you to talk about that, and yeah, what are the what ifs? Even if the what ifs are not legitimate, invalid, inflammatory, they still have to be. They can't be overlooked. They have to be addressed. That's the hard part about change that people tend to either be afraid of, and you might need to be wary of, but not afraid of if you do your homework, if you think creatively. And with that, I'm going to save this. I'm going to pop this up in a few minutes. But first I have to download it over to YouTube. It's a pain in the neck to do it on Canvas. Although somebody told me there's a way to do it, but right now I'll have this up for you before this day is over, and we move on. I just want to say again, I need you to demonstrate that you recognize how you can use these, both the futures forecasting strategies and the creative problem solving strategies to think through your strategies and your what ifs as such. By all means, please feel free to send me your material in draft beforehand. On Google Docs is probably the best way to do it, so I can respond. Anyone who has sent drafts to me knows that I respond, not the moment you send it to me, but in a day or two. Okay? If this were a real class right now, I would say questions, comments. I don't feel like being criticized. suggestions. I don't, feel free to send those to me in a private email if you want. And with that, I wish you well. If I don't, I will. I remember it again. Have a terrific Thanksgiving.